So, how many of you have heard Tony and Rosa share their story before? Okay, you got old friends out there. Great. Well, thank you for sharing with us again today. Let's see. We picked Tony and Rosa because they are about, I think, 5 or 6 years into their process, and since they say recovery takes 3 to 5 years, and here they're kind of at a 5-year-ish mark, I thought, let's ask them how they see their recovery playing out, those milestones we talked about today, or, that long-term recovery process. So, you guys, we talked on the phone, and what plunged you into recovery was Rosa's discovery of an affair that you'd been having when you were on an extended work trip in China, right?
That's correct.
And Tony, that pre-discovery section right before things came out, you'd started to feel anxious and paranoid, and just like something had to give soon, and you were very scared. And Rosa, you were having suspicions and doing some detective work, just trying to confirm this feeling that something was going on.
That's right.
Yeah. And so when you found evidence on Facebook, that's when you were plunged into just a world of hurt and anger, and suddenly it was all here. And that's where we kind of talk about recovery starting when the problem is revealed. So can you tell us about that hurt and pain? And
Well, when I confirmed it, that's when he was in China, and so I was dealing with this by myself. He wasn't here for me to confront him with it, because I wasn't going to say anything over the phone, because he was totally going to deny it, because I had already had my suspicions before he left, but he had already said, no, she's just a friend. So when it was confirmed by Facebook messages, I didn't say anything to him, but I was, of course, devastated, and I was going to work, and I was in tears, and I couldn't concentrate on my work, and so it was just consuming me.
right, so that's awesome, sharing a little bit about the pain, just crying and not concentrating. And then when you actually went to China for a visit and you did the actual confronting, didn't you share with me the anger just zoomed out? What happened then?
So that's when when I was in China, I showed Tony what I saw on the Facebook, and so then I got so upset, and so we turned off the computer, or he said that's enough, and he shut down the laptop. And so I started to walk out, and then I turned around, and I said, I'm not walking out without a slap. So I gave him a good slap in the face.
One?
And no, more than one. And then that open fist, or open hand, turned into a closed fist, and then I started pounding on him.
Wow. So you see, this lovely, sweet lady, but you see why we say partners need recovery too. I'm crying while I drive. I can't focus at work. I'm hitting my husband. I'm just full of that emotional roller coaster. So the healing journey for a partner is so important. And then for the person who's been struggling with addiction, the uniqueness here, I think, is that you pretty instantly embraced that decision to press in for recovery. You didn't go through a waffling period of, well, do I give it up, or a big struggle, or you kind of just said, wow, I've got to make a change right now, huh?
Yes, before we went to look at the Facebook, I was denying everything, and then after she did that, I was like, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? The main decision point was right then. And she asked me, we started to pray, and she asked me, is there anything else? And I said, no. And then we got on our knees, and the Holy Spirit says, no, you need to, if you're going to do this my way instead of your way, you need to be honest and truthful with her. And that's when I told her there was more emails and pictures that she had to look at, and we stopped the prayer, and we went through all those.
Yeah. So that's one of the beautiful things about their story, is Tony just embraced honesty and embraced recovery from the get-go. And I think every story is different, and not doing that makes a story much more, a recovery journey much more complicated. So that was a beautiful thing. Let's see. And Rosa, what I was impressed about the uniqueness of your story is you were able to right instantaneously also be able to set some boundaries that you needed. And I know a lot of times when I work with women in your position, they are just set to stay in that fight, angry, control, beat you up mode, or flee, I'm out of here. But you were able to kind of jump to a healthy place quickly of setting boundaries, staying connected, but being separate at the same time. Can you just briefly share about that?
Yeah, so obviously I had a lot of pain and anger, and I needed my space, and so we had talked about it, and I asked Tony to move out, and so immediately because we flew back together from China, and he immediately moved out. He just came home and grabbed some clothes and left. But I wasn't thinking about divorce, as we had shared in our full testimony. When we were coming back on the flight, I just knew that, God was going to work this out, and I was telling Tony, it's going to be okay, but you still need to move out.
I love that. Yeah, that's the balancing act that a lot of women find hard, or a lot of spouses find hard to play that, hold both of those truths at once. And then Tony, what are some of the steps that I said you jumped right into recovery. What did you do exactly?
The night that we flew in, I came to the Rock, and I went forward. And that's when I found out about FMO. And the next Tuesday I came in, and they made an announcement for the group, and I said, well, that's where I need to go. So I started with FMO. I started with therapy. I called Reineke Counseling, and they didn't return my call right away. I must have made about 20 phone calls in 2 days. I was very, very persistent. But also, when Rosa had set the boundaries, I knew this was the right thing to do. I knew that this is what I had to do, and I had to be 100% in. A lot of my, I had another addiction, and when I was going through this other processes it was like, okay, I can do it 99%, or I can, I'll stop and then just start up again. So I had to make that decision, 100% effort, and I'm not going back to that old lifestyle. And then the empathy for Rosa and what she was going through really motivated me also.
But Rosa, even though Tony was taking these amazing steps, you plugged into a men's group, you got individual therapy, you went up for prayer. What else did I had respecting her boundaries, open disclosure right away, but you still had tons of hurt and anger going on inside, even though he was like doing everything that he could/should. What was
I was
going on
also
for you?
trying to get recovery for myself and help with the forgiveness, because I still couldn't forgive him. I knew eventually I would need to, but I was struggling with that. So I came here to the Rock for a forgiveness class. I went to, again, Reineke's office and went through a group. I think it might be part of that group that's in the flyer in the back, but it's just a group for women to help with their healing. I did that. And then I also helped start the FWO group here. I was just trying to do what I could to get my own healing.
Yeah. So I love how you guys both pursued recovery persistently. And one thing I think that was probably really hard for you in those early months was, Rosa, you wanted to manage Tony a little bit, to the extent, I remember you shared, I wanted him to quit his job because the affair partner was still part of that company, and they had to interact maybe on the computer a bit, and I had asked him to quit his job to create a level of safety that I wanted. And Tony, you refused to quit the job. So that right there, I'm just saying all the things we talked about, self-control versus other control, respecting boundaries, or not, like handling your recovery. Can you share a little bit about that challenge for you?
Yeah, it was a challenge. I really quite didn't understand it, but I was putting it in God's hands, because I knew Tony was doing that all that he could to help me as well, and to move forward in our recovery. So I just had to put it in God's hands and try to understand.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What did you learn about controlling and letting go when Tony wouldn't leave his job?
That it wasn't going to be up to me.
So really starting to let go of the process. That's huge. And then I'm supposed to invite you, Tony, but my notes aren't here, to share. Where? Yeah. Well, I think actually, go ahead, Tony. Why don't you go ahead and share how you helped Rosa, even though you weren't getting rid of the job and doing that change. She's asked for this level of safety to be respected, and you didn't. So what were you doing to help her trust your process?
I was very transparent. We had talked about in our testimony that I was receiving emails from the other woman on CC because we were still working for the same company, same department. And I would come home and I would show it to Rosa. I would very transparent. She had full access to my computer, my emails. She looked at my phone log to make sure there was no phone calls overseas. And it wasn't that she was controlling me. I did not feel that at all. Her support motivated me, and that was really it. Instead of being controlled, like I said, it was just I had to do whatever I could to regain her trust, and I was really motivated to do it. There was another part that we prayed together daily. Even though I wasn't living at the house, I would call her and we would pray early in the morning. And then I would come at lunchtime to the house where we would meet for lunch, and then sometimes in dinner. Then there was one point where we watched the movie Fireproof, and the next day I came to the house, and Rosa said she needed to disclose some things to me that happened when we were divorced and we got remarried. And then during the process, God had said, you need to tell her all these other things, and I'm going, no, she just needs to know about the affair. I don't need to do that. And he says, no, you do. And that's when I did my full disclosure. I had written everything down, and I said, this is everything I need to confess to her.
Yeah. And I think something else that you were doing, you said after watching Fireproof, you took the Love Dare, the 40-day Love Dare, and you journaled all the ways you loved on her, and then you presented that to her. So Rosa had a concrete experience of your loving on her and turning your focus to her instead of to yourself. That was awesome. Okay, so after this, it's been about 4 months in, and you finally were able to forgive Tony. What was that like?
Peace. It gave me a peace, and to be able to also let him to come back home. And God's just amazing the way he works, because that same day that I told Tony that I forgave him was the same day that he presented me with the journal. And so it was just confirmation for me of his coming home and us moving forward.
That reminds me of what we just heard in Scott and Denise's talk about seeing God's graces along the journey and recognizing God's part of this painful process so I can continue to keep my heart open and trust and work. I like that.
That's right.
But even though you forgave him, even though you welcomed him back home, into the house, into the marriage, you still shared with me that you had pain and anger.
A lot of the pain was here at church, coming to church, hearing the worship music. It was very painful to try to worship and think about what had happened. And a lot of times during worship, I'm crying, or a lot of times during the sermon, or just anybody sharing up that was on the stage, if it had to do with pornography or an affair, that was a trigger for me, of course, and I would get upset.
Yeah. And then so the pain was just manifesting when triggered, and then you said, the anger, you had tended to protect Tony from your anger and kind of stuff it, and it came to a point in your work you realized, I need to express my anger. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, at one point, when I was going through the counseling and stuff, is when I realized that I still had this anger inside of me, and so I learned that I needed to get that out and expressing myself more. And so the way I express myself is a lot of times in writing. So I wrote an anger letter, basically.
Wow.
And I shared that with Tony.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That was a milestone, I'd say, for you guys. Okay, so Tony, part of your journey this first year was to learn to love Rosa in more real ways and to have empathy for her. So what was it like for you to watch her struggle with anger and pain even a year in? I know a lot of addicts get frustrated that their wife is still angry, still hurt, and they just have this, it's hard for them. So how did you deal with it?
It just, God just, I have not ever been really a compassionate person. And my compassion for her, especially when we're sitting here and I could see her tear up during worship, I would just put my arm around her and just love on her and just not ever question what she was going through, but just affirm what she was going through, and by showing the compassion. A couple of things that really helped me too is when we were in Aaron's office, and it's easy for me and her to look at a therapist and be able to talk to them one-on-one, and then he told me, he says, now face Rosa and look at the pain that you caused her in her eyes. And that was a huge milestone for me, because that way I could see what she was going through, and it was directed towards me, and it was because of me. So I had to do that. But again, it was one of the other things is about not getting frustrated, and I tell this to men and that I lead, is I will never have the right, it could be 15, 20 years down the line, to ever say you should be over it. I'll never have that right. And it's I get emotional now more than her.
Aw, yeah. So now we're kind of at about a 6-month in. You guys have plunged into your recovery groups, into therapy, the Love Dare. You're really working hard. And it took you a while to find a group for women. You almost had to help start one up just to get that need met. And Tony, you said to me you started doing some deeper early trauma work in your therapy. Can you share, oh thank you Danny, can you share some of what you were learning in therapy and how you were healing inside?
God really started to pull back the layers. I found out, going through the therapy, it was I grew up with not having unconditional love, and it was performance based, and also on top of that, I have dyslexia, and so there was a lot of shame that I grew up with, and just I isolated myself, and it was amazing how God just started to say, you need to start working on yourself, find out what the root cause was, and then start the healing process.
Okay, so you established sobriety, started to attend to your marriage, and then you started to look into the deeper background of what's going on. And Rosa, what were you focused on at this point in your healing?
Learning about the addiction so I can better understand what he was going through. And also I was learning about myself, and through therapy, through the FWO classes, learning where my low self-esteem started. I thought it was mostly because of him and what had happened, but it wasn't. I learned how my own low self-esteem started from my childhood, way back. So.
Yeah. So you were doing some deeper focusing on yourself now work too. And then at about a year in, you guys had another milestone in your recovery when you went back to China. Can you share about that?
She was a little bit apprehensive about me going back, but what I did,
Back to where the affair had occurred.
Yes, correct.
You away from her on a long trip, yeah.
As I prepared to go, I had my FMO guys. Rosa says he even said, I set up an Excel spreadsheet of who was going to call me when, and because of the time difference, it was convenient for them to call me in the mornings and in the evenings to keep me accountable. I actually I called into one of the FMO meetings from a conference room in China to see how the group was going and to let them know what I was going through. But also one of the healing parts for me is I actually ran through the city, because I run, and I was running through the city, and later on I told Rosa about that. But I ran through where I had been, where I committed sin, and as I was doing this, I was just crying like crazy. I was listening to some Christian music, but as I was running, I was kicking the dust back. So it was kind of letting all that sin go. And when I was in Hong Kong, I was in the Hong Kong harbor, and I was running along, and I was scooping. I was literally running, and people probably thought I was crazy. I was motioning like this to the harbor, and all my sin was being dumped in that harbor, just like Jesus talks about when the pigs went over the cliff. And so that was a tremendous healing process for me, because now my memories of China and Hong Kong are that cleansing. And when I came home and explained that to Rosa, she fully didn't understand, but now I believe she does, and it was a tremendous cleansing for me to do that.
I was wondering if you could share, this is such a classic partner's experience to the struggle to be hands off of his recovery, and here he's doing something that really kind of felt threatening, going by all the old, love affair haunts. And so just share how you handled that.
Just trusting in God, because like Tony said, I didn't understand it at first. At first I was like, you did what? You went back to all these places? And I didn't understand it. And so I just had to trust in God again, and trust in Tony, because I knew that he was, if he felt led to do this, that it was God's leading.
What I really hear in your process is learning to see the choice points, the choice to trust God at work at Tony, the choice to be hands off and keep your peace instead of getting hands on and angry and directive.
That's
so
right.
really starting to be empowered to make choices.
Exactly.
Wow.
She could trust me more because of the right decisions I was making.
Yeah.
So that really, I believe, helped her trust what God was doing in my life.
And I want to highlight that a year in, it still was hard because it's such a slow process. Just like you guys, I think they said, the partner is about maybe a year behind the addict. So here's Tony being a gem, and and Rosa still having a hard time having to make a choice to receive it and to be hands off. It's hard. Okay, at this point, we're about a year in, and you guys have established enough recovery, different than sobriety. I mean, he established sobriety like that, but we've had a year of recovery, and you guys started sharing your story in public. And just briefly, can you share kind of the points I wanted you to highlight about that? How did sharing your story in public, how does that play a part in your recovery?
First of all, it's very humbling. And the second part is by sharing it, we were able to, it was part of our recovery to be able to share it.
Yeah.
It was so early in our recovery. But also, it helped us. If I'm saying this in public, I better be doing it, because she's gonna look at me and go, "You're not doing that." So it really helped us to grow. How God used those experiences to be able to touch other people. And when other people would come to us and tell us, "Wow, our story is the same," I would just my heart would break, because there's so many people out there that are going through this, and so if we can help one couple in their recovery, praise God.
Yeah. And Rosa, how did it help you?
I'm not sure if I know we're out of time, so
Well, we have a
Danny
couple
too,
minutes.
but-
We're gonna take a couple minutes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
So Tony pretty much said it all.
Okay.
He really
I
did
think
cover
that
it.
there was a piece here that would be really valuable to just mention. That I think you had said to me on the phone that you find it very bonding.
Yes, it
Okay.
is. For us to be in ministry together, it has been very bonding.
It helped
helpful.
reknit the relationship. Yeah. Okay, so here at the 1 year mark, given all the progress you've made, all the bonding, this new joint ministry, because you're getting asked to speak in a lot of places, you, Rosa, are still hurting at a deep level. Can you share about the marriage retreat? You guys went to a marriage retreat about 1 year in, and they kind of sprung it on all the couples to stand up, face each other, and repeat their marriage vows, renew their marriage vows together. What was that like for you after all this recovery?
Yeah, that was a year later, and I didn't know that it was going to hit me so hard, but it was very, very difficult for me to do that.
You didn't even want to be
No.
saying the words.
No, I was doing it just because everybody else was doing it, and we were, they had asked us to, but with every word, I was just tears. I was just in tears, because
hard.
to me it was very painful and hurtful that we were saying these things, but it really, I felt like it didn't mean anything, because, where was the till death do we part and out love and cherish, to me when that affair happened, it just negated all that.
Wow. So how long did it take you before you noticed the tears had stopped? They could mention pornography in a sermon. You could worship the Lord without crying. When did you go, wow, I think I'm past the pain?
It was gradual, but it was to a point one time when we just came to service, and I was like, wow, I'm not crying anymore. And it just, I just realized that I was past that.
Yeah. I think when we were talking, you said it was about 18 months or so total. So it was in your second year
Yes.
that you kind of moved past that deep pain. And that's another milestone
Yes.
in your journey, really. Yeah. All right. So let's see, as we wrap up, Tony, you shared that during your third year of recovery that you started to take your recovery from, your sobriety and your own internal unconditional love, deeper trauma work, and your marriage to outer relationships like your family of origin and parents. Can you share really briefly about how that third year of recovery had a new focus?
It was amazing. It started with my stepfather, who we found out was going to have cancer, and I just started to pour into him, and he never said that he loved us. And I remember going on the phone, and 3 or 4 times I had to tell him, "Say you love me," and he finally did before he passed away.
Wow.
And he prayed over me, and just our relationship, we got so close. during this process, and I thank God that we were able to do that before he passed. Then my father, my biological father, we have had an amazing journey together. We did
just recently
we did a 1,200-mile trip to go see my brother and other family members, and we never turned on the radio. We talked, and it was amazing, how just that whole experience. And also, we went to Tijuana and did our testimony. I don't speak fluent Spanish, and my dad interpreted for us.
Oh, wow.
And they didn't know he was my father. And as I'm going to get emotional now. As we're doing the testimony, I talk about how I hated my father and all this other stuff. And then I talked about how God restored all that. And I said, I want to introduce you to my father.
Oh,
and the audience just
gosh.
went, whoa. They just took a deep breath. And my dad's not saved yet. But he's seeing the transformation. He's seeing what's going on. And I praise God for that. And then my mom also, I had wrote down a letter, and we sat down with her, and God's still working on that. But it's the progress that we're making, my mom and my siblings and people at work, and the forgiveness and the bitterness that I had is now God has taken that away through fasting and prayer. It's been an amazing journey.
Wow. Yeah. So here's this journey. You're 5 or 6 years in, so that's our 3 to 5 year recovery phase. You still tear up. You still, feel it. But you've made so many beautiful changes in your life. It's just opened up. And Rosa, we didn't get time to go into it, but you shared that even today your pain is in the past, your anger is in the past, but even today you still can be triggered to remember, and intrusive thoughts can still bother you just, probably briefly, but they come in at key moments when you're triggered and you think about it still, and it's like, ugh. Yeah, so
but now just as soon as they come in, they go out as well. I don't linger on it, or I'm able to deal with it better. And some of them, the triggers that I used to have aren't even triggers anymore. So
it's getting better.
Yes.
Yeah, and I just want to wrap up with a neat quote I heard somewhere. I don't know who to attribute it to, but they said, in this process, you will lose some things that you will never regain, and you will also gain some things that you never would have had. And I see that true in your story, and we're just, I think, all thankful that you shared your story again with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Had we never been through this, we wouldn't have the strong marriage that we have now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank God.